Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's software quality assurance lecture. Today, we're going to talk about one more lecture on testing, and then we're going to be moving on to some other topics. Today's lecture, though, is a little bit different than what we've covered so far. So far, we've really focused on systematic testing techniques that utilize different types of coverage to provide confidence about the software working correctly. And in these techniques, we've done a lot to stress best practices, including talking about the benefits of automation for certain parts of the development process, or sorry, the testing process. Today, we're going to actually talk about a different type of testing, and it's a largely manual testing technique that actually plays an important role as well in software quality assurance. And specifically, that's something called exploratory testing. How many of you have heard about exploratory testing? Anyone? No? Okay. So we've learned before that the other testing methods we've looked at have really focused on automation because, especially in an agile environment, that automation of testing means faster builds. It also means scalability of testing as software grows. It also means consistency from one release to another, where your test process is always going to work the same way. So you don't accidentally make mistakes, which cause problems from one test run to another. So that's what we really emphasize with automation. However, what exploratory testing does is it considers the benefits of not doing this automated coverage-based testing, but instead looking at manual testing, which means that it's testing which relies heavily on the expertise of the tester. And it's really, I view it as, some people say, manual testing is even more important than automated. I've heard that argument made. But in general, just like anything, these techniques can be layered on top of each other, and they can be actually used in a complementary fashion, which can actually strengthen your overall testing strategy, because the manual testing provides opportunities to find bugs, to increase your confidence, that aren't necessarily the same as what you get with standard automated systematic testing methods. So when I talk about automated testing, I'm really talking about an emphasis on writing code to test the system, right? That's what we're really doing. So automated testers often have to create or build very robust test harnesses, test frameworks that actually allow you to run a whole lot of tests really fast and get really good summaries of results. Manual testing, on the other hand, the emphasis is not on the tester being a developer in terms of writing code and writing test systems, but instead the emphasis on interacting with the system under test by providing manual inputs through the user interface. So it's a little bit different here, right? You're not creating software to automate to run tests. You're actually manually giving inputs through the interface to test the system. And as I mentioned, I believe these techniques are actually very complementary, but there's a reality that we do know, and that's that regardless of how, short of exhaustive testing techniques, we've been utilizing largely automated testing techniques in practice. A lot of companies do this, and bugs still make it into releases, right? And are still found by end users. So, and not all those bugs that are found by end users are known ahead of time by the developers, right? So bugs go unfound and bugs go unfixed. The idea here is that manual testing can fill that gap by using real user data to test an application's interface to assess the release readiness. So once you've done all your automated testing, or maybe in combination with some of the automated testing towards the end, you would use the manual testing to just provide another layer of confidence in the system and to try to fill that gap in terms of assessing release readiness. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, feel free to ask and I can address them as we're going. Okay, so this is actually from one of the textbooks. So James Whitaker is somebody who's worked at Google, I believe also worked at Microsoft. Could be wrong on that one, actually. I know he's definitely worked at Google. Um, and he wrote a book on exploratory software testing. And in that book, he actually talked about the role of manual testing. And he said, quote, manual testing is human present testing. A human tester uses her brain, her fingers, her wits to create the scenarios that will cause software either to fail or fulfill its mission. Manual testing is the best choice for finding bugs related to the underlying business logic of an application. So what we're talking about here is not finding bugs because I accidentally used a less than instead of a less than or equal to in my code, or because I have some small mistake. It's really about bugs related to underlying business logic is what James Whitaker views as being one of the really, I guess, key missions or key reasons to do manual testing. So if you want to think about the range of manual testing, because manual testing exploratory testing is not the only type of manual testing, okay? But there's a range of them, and the difference here is if you're wondering, what we're talking about here is on one end of the spectrum we have scripted manual testing, right? And on the other end we have completely unscripted, where there's no guidance and it's just intuition to follow. Exploratory testing is almost to the other end of the spectrum, because unlike scripted manual testing, which really is a script which says, okay, first click this button, then do this, then do this, then do this. So it's really the tester is clicking through and following it. With exploratory testing, you start off with a rough idea of what you're trying to test, but you take into account the feedback that the software gives you, and you use that information to inform the next decision you make. So the next decision is not scripted out. You may have some idea that you start with that, was it sort of not a script, but a key start point was scripted. But the real point is that the tester uses their insights to explore through the testing, or explore through the software, I should say, with the testing. Okay. Um, and what do I mean by that? Well, in most test methods, we have what's called a test strategy, a test plan, and a test case design, along with inputs and expected outputs for our tests. And we've seen this, we've done this in our project where we've created these things. And the test strategy is at the highest level. You then have a test plan of how you implement the strategy, system for designing your tests, which you explain. And then for every test case, you have the inputs that feed into the system, and you have the expected outputs, which you're going to compare the actual outputs to. But in exploratory testing, things are a little more flexible than that, and they aren't necessarily as rigorously documented in advance. And the way we actually plan and document exploratory testing is as follows. There are different approaches, but this is just one example. So sometimes what you may do is you may use a scripted starting point, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, or a flexible script, which gives you ideas. So it doesn't say exactly what to do. It just says, oh, try some combination of these things to cause this type of response. If this response is achieved, try to do these things. If it isn't, try to do these things. But with the understanding that you can always deviate from that, because the script is not a requirement. It's guidance, right? It gives you a starting point. It gives you some ideas about how you can navigate through the space of the software, of the possible interactions with the software and the user interface, but it is flexible and it is guidance, not mandatory things you have to do. The other thing that's really important, we've always talked about, is the ability to reproduce and rerun bugs. So if I find a bug with exploratory testing, just like with a systematic testing, I want to know what caused the bug, and I want to be able to reproduce the bug, because when I make a fix, I want to know that the bug no longer exists, right? And that's what we were talking about with like failure tests. So often it's key that when you do exploratory testing, you actually record the steps that are taken by the exploratory tester. And it would be a bit onerous because it's not known in advance. You don't have a strict script. So, and it would be a bit onerous to have that person constantly keeping exact details of what they've done, right? It could interrupt the flow of what they're doing and distract them sometimes, although someone may want to do it that way. What you often do with exploratory testing is you use automated techniques to capture the exploratory testing session, so you can then go back and look at the steps that it took to get to a particular bug. And the combination of techniques that are often utilized to capture the tests is screen capture applications. That'll show you exactly what was clicked in the interface, what was typed in the interface, where they actually clicked. It'll also show you, was the window maximized, was the window small, or it'll show you all those kinds of things. How much time was there between action A and action B exactly? So it'll show you all the information about the interface interactions. And then the key logging will actually also give you the exactly what was pressed in terms of the keys and that on the keyboard. So you get that information, and from that information, you can recreate bugs by rerunning them and reproducing them. Okay? And there are actually tools out there that will actually, if you record the user interface interactions like this, they will actually capture all this information, and not only will they allow you to rerun them, they will automate the rerunning of the testing. So they will actually follow you, do all the clicking and stuff, and they will redo all the clicks exactly as you did, and with the exact same timing, with the exact same text entry, and so on. So that's typically how we plan and document exploratory testing. What I want to do next is I've got a couple of videos that I'm going to show as part of this lecture. So we're going to just pause our recording now because we don't record other videos in this. However, the links of these are shared in the slides and are available on the website if you want to rewatch. So I'm going to pause this lecture now, and I'd encourage you to watch the exploratory testing video from Global App Testing, and then we will return and continue with our lecture. Hi everybody, welcome back. After looking at this video, we sort of have talked about the three key phases and some of the benefits of exploratory testing from the perspective of Global App Testing, which is a company that does they work with a number of different clients and so on. What we're going to do next is we'll continue on with today's lecture, and let's talk about two different types of exploratory testing. Let's talk about exploratory testing, the small, and you can probably guess the next topic after that. Which is exploratory testing. Anyone want to guess? Okay, nobody wants to guess. The hint is exploratory testing in the small, and yes, exploratory testing in the large. So we'll look at these two different contexts to think about exploratory testing. So with exploratory testing in the small, the key goal here is to make small decisions correctly. And what we're really focusing on in the testing here is localized decisions in the app or in the application. So if you think about this, what are we doing here in terms of test inputs? Well, we're going to be looking at positive versus negative inputs, input filters, input checks, trying different special characters, looking at output coverage and how we cover outputs. And we're really going to be focused on testing the software state, the data stored internally in the program. And this includes the program counter. And typically, software state is really useful when you're actually thinking about, I guess, sequencing within a test. So sequencing of a number of different user interface interactions or input combinations that you're testing. And another thing we're also looking at and we're thinking about is code paths when we're doing test inputs. And you may think about, well, wait a sec, I thought path coverage in these things or what we were doing in um, when we were doing like white box testing? Well, yes, we were. But the thing about path coverage is you're only interested in covering the number of unique paths with respect to trying to cover all the combination of um, independent paths in the application. Uh, in this case here, we're not interested in providing the coverage. What we're interested in doing is considering the paths to explore from the perspective of using real user data um, and seeing what actually ends up happening when we actually try different things. So it's not so much, if you think about it this way, say there are 5 independent paths through a piece of software. Well, with 5 tests, you're done, right? But there's lots of other paths which are dependent on those. And sometimes it may not be just simply that a given statement causes a problem. It may be the interaction along one path, which isn't one of the ones you're testing, with a certain type of input leads to the issue. And the idea here is that exploratory testing is really trying to find key paths that are likely to cause problems. And when they're testing with real user data and thinking about things like input checks, so input filters, that kind of thing. And things like input checks could include things like functional security, different things. So you could be looking at thinking about things like, when on the security side, even you could be thinking about, well, if it's a web app, are they actually checking for buffer overflows in the application, where somebody can put in too much information that it can overflow the data structure that's storing that information internally. So there's a whole bunch of things that could be involved with exploratory testing in the small. The other thing you also have to consider lastly is the environment when testing. Now, let's go to the other side, because I think this is the exploratory testing in the small, but I think you'll really get the picture of this by also looking at exploratory testing in the large. And while the testing in the small focus on localized decisions within a test, exploratory testing in the large is really about a strategy to guide test design and application exploration overall. So what it's interested in doing is it's interested in focusing on how applications are explored, not how a given feature or decision in a test is made. So, so if you think about this, is that this is really large, big picture perspective. And from this, in terms of test design, how each test works, that's more testing in the small. How you overall the strategy you take to do exploratory testing, that's the large part. The other thing that I mentioned, and this was what I was trying to allude to when I talked about how just by providing path coverage doesn't mean you actually cover all the interesting interactions, right? There are paths that may not be independent that have unique interactions that the paths you choose to cover in path coverage don't do. And that's why when you're doing this test planning, it shouldn't solely be based on thinking about covering features, covering paths, covering different elements, because this misses interactions. You're interested in thinking often outside the box about interesting ways that this software may be used in practice and possible ways it could go wrong or something could happen. And what you basically do is they don't think about, so even though they're interacting in exploratory testing with the user interface and they're trying different features and so on, they don't think about features as the basic unit of coverage that they're trying to do. What they actually think about is tours, and they have this notion of tours. And tours are something that provide guidance and often consider interesting execution paths not covered by feature-based manual testing or ad hoc testing. So they're really trying to think about customized, intricate execution paths that may be of interest or may potentially be points of weakness or bottlenecks or whatnot that should be tested maybe in a deeper way. And that's what these tours are. They provide guidance. And that's what I used before I talked about it, that when you do scripted testing, manual testing, you have a script that you follow. when you do exploratory testing, while you may have some script in the sense of some information written down about what you want to do, including this tour information, it's guidance. You can utilize it and follow it, but you can deviate from it if you see information in the interface output from the application that leads you to think a different way of exploring this, it would be beneficial. Okay, so that's the exploratory testing in the small and in the large. Are there any questions about this? Okay. The next thing I want to do is actually show you another brief video, and this is actually one from a senior quality assurance engineer at a company in Turkey, and she's going to talk a little bit about how in her company, she uses exploratory testing to improve mobile app development, and I thought it would be useful to see how this is applied in practice as well. So this is sort of a little bit of an alternative, whereas with the global app testing, we were hearing from a consultancy company that was utilizing it with clients potentially. This is a company that uses it in-house as a way to do quality assurance of mobile applications. So again, I will pause our video and I will go over and show you the YouTube video. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We just saw a video which discussed how one particular company looks at improving mobile apps that they develop by using exploratory testing. One of the interesting things I think you should take away from this is that they actually talked about part of it because they're doing mobile app development, and these applications actually are going to be run in a variety of different environments across a variety of different devices, different screen sizes, operating system versions, and so on. One of the things that they actually do is they actually try out all of these different environments, and these different environments, that sort of goes along with what we talked about with the testing and the small as well, is that you think about the environment as part of each of the individual tests that you're doing with exploratory. So that's something that they were actually doing in their testing. So it's consistent with what we talked about today in the lecture. So let's actually go on a little further here and let's actually sort of summarize. So what have we seen so far today? Well, we've talked about exploratory testing as one of the methods for manual testing that you can use. We've compared exploratory testing with scripted testing in terms of the amount of flexibility you have and the amount of, I guess, that's required during the test run in terms of the tester using their own intuition and their own experience. We also talked about exploratory testing in the small and in the large. We talked about how to do test planning as well as how to document tests. Often that's done using automated techniques that capture the screen and capture the keystrokes that the tester actually is typing so that you can then replay and reproduce bugs. One other thing that we did talk about as well was we did see these two videos. One of the videos talked about sort of the main steps involved with exploratory testing from one company's perspective, and the other one talked about a real example of how they use exploratory testing in their company to test mobile apps. One thing I think it's useful to bring out, we haven't talked about it yet, but it's a topic we sometimes talk about in this course as well, is covering other different aspects of quality. So quality could be about the functionality, the functional correctness of the app, or software. It could be about the performance. It could be about the maintainability, the interoperability, portability, security, and so on. And when we go into the security space, One thing that I know I've been involved in with some work that I've done in research in the past is we've looked at a particular type of testing technique called penetration testing or pen testing. Have you guys heard of that before? Yeah, so this is actually penetration testing. I largely think of it as a security specific type of exploratory testing because it has very similar idea in that you start off with some ideas, some pre-scripted starting points or potential strategies, but in the end, the tester takes on the role. Because remember, the idea here is that you're testing it from the perspective of real user data or from a real user. And in the case of security and pen testing, you're not testing it from a typical user or stakeholder that you're interested in having with the software, but you're testing it from the perspective of somebody attacking the software. So you have to have the tester take the mindset of the attacker and think about ways to exploit and break the security of the system and determine what can they actually access. And this is very much a manual process that's exploratory in nature, more so than fully scripted. So I did want to mention that because I do think it's important to understand that sometimes the terminology that's utilized, can be specific to a certain area, and there are overlaps between different types of techniques and different problem spaces. So if you ever heard about pen testing or penetration testing, it is you can largely consider it to be a type of exploratory testing, from my opinion. So I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so that concludes. If you're interested in learning more about exploratory software testing, a lot of good resources online. Uh, there's also the textbook that I mentioned by James Whitaker on exploratory software testing. Feel free to reach out if you do want more resources. I'm happy to provide them to you.